Hello and welcome to the Heat Check podcast, Miami Herald's Miami Heat podcast. I'm David Wilson. I'm joined, as always, on the other line by Anthony Chang, our Heat beat writer here at the Herald. Anthony, I spent some time yesterday trying to come up with a good emo nickname for you, like you.
Yeah,
I didn't really have an emo phase. I couldn't. My emo knowledge is not It's very surface level. Obviously,
I have
I
to
know the
say,
hit.
yeah, I have to say I did have an emo phase. What didn't last long, but in high school there was that emo phase. I think I was listening to Dashboard Confessional a little bit. Does Coldplay count as
I
emo a
don't think
little? Like
Coldplay counts.
some songs from
Yeah,
Coldplay count.
but they're not in the to me the emo. You've got to have like the little bit of
Like
like
rock.
whine to it, right? Like the
Yeah,
Blink 182 or Fall Out Boy, like the
right. Panic
uh,
at the Disco type.
yeah, Panic at the Disco,
Yeah,
right? There's like a pop rock thing to it, whereas Coldplay, I think is just I don't know if they're rock enough. They're
yeah,
emotional
that's
music.
fair.
It's not like
Yeah,
emo rock though.
that's fair. But yeah, I did have my Dashboard Confessional phase. I'm afraid to admit there, but I got out of that emo phase pretty quickly. It seems like Jimmy Butler did as well because after showing up to media day with his emo look with the straightened hair and the piercings, pierced eyebrow, pierced lip, pierced nose, eyeliner, painted nails, painted black. At a training camp, he has his hair braided and he looks like normal Jimmy Butler again.
Yeah. Fall Out Boy, Jimmy Beat
Yeah,
World, lots of good content out of Heat Media Day, and it kind of saved the day a little bit because it stole the show when it could have been about Drew Holiday in Boston and Damian Lillard in Milwaukee, and um, instead it was about Jimmy Butler and that goofy haircut that's going to show up on headshots all year long.
I just can't wait to see the intro video this year, which is going to be
Right.
him dressed like that. And the media day cover, I don't know what they're going to do because the photos they take that day are for the media guide. And the media guide, like, they save that for years.
Yeah.
So you're going to look back at that cover of the media guide and it might be like Bam, Tyler, and Jimmy with his hair
With his
brushed around
hair
across his
brushed right
face.
over
And
his eyes.
he had somebody walking around. I've never seen the video, but he had somebody walking around with him, making sure his hair was like perfect right here. Like the swoop was perfect. He wouldn't put on headphones like for interviews because he didn't want to mess up his hair. It was very well orchestrated by Jimmy Butler and his people. That's for sure.
Yeah, good bit after last year. He wore the long braids to kind of troll.
Yeah,
I guess was the original idea just like troll the idea that that will be the headshot that they show on like ESPN.com all year and that kind of stuff, or was it just a funny thing to do for media day? Jimmy's got he thinks things through.
I don't think he likes being made to do anything, right?
Right,
And
that's
that day
true.
he's made to like do 50 interviews and take all these pictures, and
Right, yeah.
we all know Jimmy Butler doesn't like that stuff.
It's his way to
So
like
this is his
rebel.
way of like, rebel and like
It's
being
his emo
like,
phase.
exactly, yeah. It's and it was like perfect because like I don't think it had like an ulterior like a meaning behind it. Like I even asked somebody, like one of Jimmy's people, I'm like, is he sad they didn't get Jamie Lillard? Is he really this sad? Is this like a message saying basically like, I'm not happy with the offseason? They're like, no, this is just Jimmy being Jimmy. Like,
And I think anyone who follows Jimmy on Instagram knows his music taste skews
eclectic.
in like the direction where like he would be an emo guy, like eclectic and very, he likes white people music, and
It's
emo
funny.
is kind of like the signature white people music of the moment.
It's funny because Bam Adebayo was speaking like to the media in the press conference room, and all of a sudden we hear from the hallway My Chemical Romance blasting. And we all looked at each other like, that Jimmy, and it was just Jimmy with his phone like blasting like emo music. It was great. It was
Yeah,
great.
yeah, he's a character. He never ceases to amaze. I'll say.
He doesn't. And I wanted to share a story before we get into like,
Yeah, we got real basketball stuff to talk about.
yeah,
We're gonna talk about
yeah,
Drew Holiday in Boston. I didn't get to talk about Damian Lillard in Milwaukee last week.
yeah,
Like you said, media day's here, so it's basketball season.
yeah.
But yes,
Before we get to the basketball, I want to share my experience of just like when I saw Jimmy for the first time on media day on Monday. So Eric Spoelstra spoke to the reporters at 9:30 in the morning. It was like a 30-minute press conference to kick off media day.
Mm-hmm.
a room full of like 50 media members, maybe more. And then we're waiting for Jimmy. Jimmy's next to come into the press conference room. But the Heat media relations staff got Jimmy alone for like a couple minutes with a couple of the beat writers, myself, Ira Winderman of the Sun Sentinel, Tim Reynolds of the Associated Press. We got him a little bit before he went to the press conference room. So they call us over. We don't know what Jimmy's going to look like. I don't think any of us are even thinking he's going to do that again. We had so much other stuff on our mind. We get into the hallway, Championship Alley right there. And there's Jimmy Butler, emo Jimmy Butler, leaning against the wall, looking at us, all serious, no
Smoking
smile.
a cigarette.
That's not like nothing. Like nothing is different, right? And like Ira, Tim, and I, like I don't think we wanted to even like we didn't know what to do. We were kind of like stunned, and we just asked him like serious questions about like Damian Lillard. And then like I'm looking at Tim Reynolds, and I'm like asking like kind of motioning to him like,
who's gonna ask about
this? Like who's gonna ask the question? And finally, one of us did, and Jimmy stayed in character. Credit to him. He's like, "This is just my emo phase. It is what it is. I'm one with my emotions today, and maybe tomorrow I'll feel differently. But right now, this is how I feel." So we got like the first look at Jimmy, and then when we were done, he walks into the press conference room, and that's where all the photos are taken, the videos, the laughing, the gasps when he walks into the room, and everyone's like, "What the?" So it was it's definitely stole the show of media day. I think like everyone thought, and Damian Lillard was a big topic of conversation. Tyler Herro, we hadn't spoken to Tyler all off season, right? And his name had been in trade rumors all off season.
Yeah, he's the one who should have come in his emo phase.
For real. Actually, and also another thing about that, we saw Bam Adebayo a few minutes later after Jimmy spoke to the media. And we said, "Bam, have you seen Jimmy yet?" And he's like, "No, I haven't seen him. What's up?" So Tim Reynolds shows him a photo of Jimmy.
Picture, yeah.
And he couldn't believe it. He just like couldn't stop laughing. He's like, "What is wrong with that man? Like, what is wrong with him?" He was cracking up. So that's my story.
Yeah, it was made for a fun media day. Media day can be a circus, can also be kind of boring, right? If there's not a lot change on the team. And for the Heat, there were storylines, but in a lot of ways, like there's not a big new star to talk about. So it was a good distraction, I think, for Heat fans who might be in their own emo phase right now after the way the last week went. Obviously, you and Tim Reynolds, who you just mentioned, talked last week right after the Damian Lillard trade happened about the implications for the Heat. And then was it on Sunday, I think, or Saturday? Sometime over the weekend. Everyone kind of knew Jrue Holiday was the next piece to move, and the Celtics grab him. The Heat's, I'd say, two biggest challengers in the Eastern Conference, both go out and get all-stars in the span of a week. And I think if I'm a Heat fan, like I understandably a little like what the hell just happened here, because it's not just that you missed out on Damian Lillard. It's not just that your rivals got better. It's that we were a week away from media day, and all of a sudden you're like, all right, we're right there, and your two chief rivals in the conference in basically one move, because the Jrue Holiday move is obviously like subsequent to the Damian Lillard move. In one move, the Blazers essentially make the Heat's two rivals significantly better, I think. I mean, obviously, I think certainly the Bucks. I know you're a little bit more skeptical about the Celtics, but they let them. There's kind of the two biggest moves anyone made in the offseason, and they happened all at once to the Heat's two challengers.
Yeah, it was definitely a rough week for the Heat. Not the two
biggest moves, I guess, but
yeah, but first you don't get Damian Lillard, which I think, and I was guilty of this as well, and many people were. We all said it was a matter of when, not if, with Damian Lillard. Like we all thought he was coming to Miami until he wasn't, right? And we said this in the beginning, right? Like the one thing that would change everything is if he softened his stance and maybe included a few more teams that he would be willing to go to, and that's what he did. I mean, he said, or his agent said, Milwaukee, like he'd be willing to go to Milwaukee, and they got the trade. And credit to Joe Cronin. I think he's gotten a lot of criticism leading up to this point, but he got a good package in return for him when you include what he got for Jrue Holiday from the Celtics.
Yeah.
Bottom line is, like, people can blame the Heat because, look, it was a rough offseason for them, not only because they didn't make a significant addition, but like you said, two of their prime East rivals.
Yeah, they lost two
Probably
starters.
got better.
Yeah.
And they lost two starters. And, they replaced him with Jay Rich, who's a good player, especially at the minimum. Thomas Bryant, who a serviceable big man that could probably back up Bam, probably going to be the backup center, at least start the season. But they lost two starters, and they didn't make any significant addition. Jimmy's 34, right? Like, his window's closing. I get it. But they tried for Damian Lillard. Damian Lillard wanted to be in Miami. Portland just didn't like the Heat's assets. And we went over this last week. The communication was really bad between Portland and Miami. I think the initial conversation was Portland asking for Bam Adebayo, and Miami was like, what the heck? Like, Bam Adebayo? Like, that's why Damian Lillard wants to come here. How are we going to trade you Bam Adebayo? And then Portland basically was like, well, if you're going to keep Bam and Jimmy, then we want everybody else in the roster. Every other appealing asset in your roster, we want them all. And the Heat were like, we're not going to gut the roster to get Damian Lillard, and then we're not a championship team anymore because, we have those three, but you have to be ready to win now with, Damian at 33 and Jimmy at 34. So it was just a tough situation where talks really didn't get far. And that's Portland's right. They didn't like the Heat's assets, and that's the bottom line. And as far as Jrue Holiday, Boston gave up a lot for Jrue. And you could argue that it made them better, and Drew's a really good two-way player. But I don't know. I think the Heat pursued him. I don't know to the level. I know Brian Windhorst from ESPN said they were one of the teams that offered a significant package for Jrue. I can't confirm that. Brian is usually accurate, so I trust him. But I do know they pursued him. And Boston ended up getting him. They included Rob Williams, Malcolm Brogdon, multiple first-round picks. Like, that's a lot for Jrue Holiday, who's last year of his contract, going to sign another big contract, who's, I think, 33, 34 years old. But we'll see if it works out for Boston. But I think Miami had to assess the value for these players. And at the end of the day, for Damian, they didn't have the assets to get him. Portland didn't like the assets. And for Jrue Holiday, I don't think they're willing to go as far as Boston was for him.
Yeah, we don't have to belabor the Lillard stuff, I guess, too much because you and Tim talked about that a lot last week. But it feels like so much of what that came down to is just the Heat's best asset is Tyler Herro, and it does not fit with the Blazers. There was always going to have to be, I think, a third. I mean, I think even we thought a third team was going to have to get involved. Right? Yeah. Whether it was Herro going to Brooklyn, at one point San Antonio was a team mentioned. It just did not seem like they had very much interest in Tyler Herro. I get it to an extent. I don't get it in the other sense that you just stink and you should want to get good players. Now, at the same time, like you said, the haul worked out for them, and that was always, as we've said it from the day one. They had no incentive to get this deal done until last week because they didn't want him to show up at media day, essentially, right? And Joe Cronin wisely waited and got. The deal didn't get worse, certainly. You can quibble about is whatever the rumored Heat deal. And again, we don't even know what that deal is so, sounds like they weren't talking very much, but you can argue about is Tyler Herro.
And they could have flipped Tyler Herro, just like they flipped Jrue Holiday. I don't know if you probably wouldn't have gotten what you got for Jrue Holiday, but you would have gotten something back.
Yeah, so I think you can quibble about what whether the Heat's offer, whatever it was better than what Portland got, but I think it's all opinion. It's not one was clearly better than the other. Them waiting did not worsen their leverage at all. I think them getting DeAndre Ayton is and that might have happened no matter what, right?
I think it could have happened.
That would have happened no matter what. Right. Just to make some of the math work and Phoenix clearly wanted to get off him, but that's as pretty good return for a guy like Damian Lillard. And then, as you said, obviously they get Jrue Holiday, who's an all-star as well, and are able to flip him for pretty good assets too. So they were smart. They did it well. I mean, I know Joe Cronin's gotten a lot of crap from Heat fans, but I if I was a Blazers fan, I'd be kind of pumped about the way he handled it, especially coming from my Wizards perspective, where they traded Bradley Beal for 6 second-round picks on day one, the day after he finally asked for a trade. So, I think that worked out for them. Obviously works out for Milwaukee, who I'm just pumped to watch them play.
Yeah, that pick and roll with him and Giannis is
obviously
going to be unstoppable.
I'm not saying anything that not anyone else.
No.
I'm not saying anything new here, but that's going to be really fun to watch. I'm happy for Giannis too, as a Giannis fan that He finally got a little bit like feisty, and I don't think that's a coincidence that a week later they get this Portland deal done and get Damian Lillard. But I guess we should talk more about the Drew Holiday deal because in some ways I kind of feel like the Heat kind of own the Celtics. I know the Celtics beat them last year or whatever.
Yeah, 2 years ago.
2 years ago, whatever. Yeah, 2 seasons ago. But like it feels like Jimmy's just like kind of owns them, and because even in that series he was unreal, and they like did everything they could to blow that series. Just the Heat like were out of bodies and out of gas. But I think they, in the same way that I think Heat fans are probably a little, so much is about, like you said, Jimmy Butler's 34. You got to win now. For the Celtics, those guys are younger, but they've gotten so close so many times that like they had to go all in finally. And on paper, the lineup is really good and really good defensively, especially if you look at Drew Holiday, Derek White, whoever's going to play point guard, shooting guard, then Jaylen Brown, Jason Tatum, Kristaps Porzingis.
Yeah.
I think Rob Williams is a pretty big loss for them. Obviously, he's always hurt, but I kind of thought he was the best player in the finals for them 2 years ago, like the most game-changing player they had. But they made the all-in move they kind of had to, I think, because of like the frustrations a little bit there and the impatience and the feeling that they had to get going. But you're a little bit more skeptical, and I kind of get there is a little bit of like a Kemba Walker vibe to me where they got Kemba and that was supposed to be the big move. And obviously Drew Holiday and Kemba Walker are like extremely, extremely different players. But like, Drew's getting up there in age and it's really struggled in the playoffs last year, and has even in the finals run year, right? He was like his offense was really shaky, and I think if you're Boston, you're saying we got enough offense between Tatum and maybe Porzingis. Obviously, Jaylen Brown, for as flawed as he is still a 24-point a game scorer or whatever. But yeah, it's not quite the level of slam dunk, but they might have the most complete lineup it seemed on paper, I would say, in the East.
Yeah, I give Boston credit for taking a chance, right? Like, a lot of times teams, look at the Heat, right? Like you get too deep into the playoffs, you want to bring the team back. You don't want to mess with it too much. But they took a chance and they've kind of it's a different team. I mean, I know some of the guys return, some of the key guys return, but you lose Marcus Smart, you lose Rob Williams, Malcolm Brogdon, who was Sixth Man of the Year, I believe. That's a lot. That's 3 key rotation players for them. They lose. And yes, they had Kristaps Porzingis, who had a really good season last year, good rim protector, stretches the floor. But he has injury concerns. Last year he stayed relatively healthy, but years prior, it was tough for him to stay on the court. So that's a big question mark. And then Drew Holiday. Yeah, Drew Holiday is, again, a very good player, but he's older. He's still one of the best defenders in the NBA, but you saw what Jimmy Butler did to him last year in that playoff series where he kind of basically cooked him. Drew. I mean, and look, we've seen it with Kyle Lowry, and not to bring Kyle Lowry into this unnecessarily, but small guards, like, their drop off usually, and Kemba Walker, you brought up Kemba Walker, like, is pretty fast. Like, it just happens. Like, that's what happens with smaller guards. So we'll see. We'll see what kind of Drew Holiday they get. Again, if you're making that type of trade where you're sending Rob Williams, who was a Defensive Player of the Year candidate a few years ago, Malcolm Brogdon, again, who was a key piece for them off the bench, and multiple picks. Like, that's with the intention of signing Drew long term when he's a free agent after this season. So you're investing in him, long term money. So I think it's a little bit of a gamble. Like, I'm not so sure. I think they'll be very good, but I'm just not so sure that they're better. Is that fair? Like, I don't know if they're better than last year.
They're different.
They're different, right? I don't know if they're better.
Yeah.
With the Bucks, I think they're better.
They're certainly better.
Dame complements Giannis so well. Like, those two together. And we talked about how he complemented Bam and Jimmy. It's kind of like the same thing with Giannis. Like, just their games complement each other so well. And you still have Chris Middleton, who, yes, he has injury concerns as well, but as a third wheel, I mean, there are many third. He
was a good number 2, and now he obviously
now he's at number 3. Yeah.
I mean, for the Celtics, the Drew offense stuff is like legitimately not very good in the playoffs. Shot 38% from the field 2 years ago, 40% last year in 5 games. And then even during the finals, right, he shot 40% from the field. It's not like he's been a great offensive player. Obviously, he, scores a bit because he's got the ball in his hand a lot. And it leaves Boston, their point guard situation is a little murky. Like, Drew's a point guard, I guess, but is he a great point guard? Is he a better shooting guard?
Yeah.
Derek White, obviously, kind of the same kind of deal. But honestly, Marcus Smart, I always felt the same way about, like, I didn't feel good when he had the ball. He
wasn't a true point guard either. Yeah.
So they haven't
a lot of times
solved
Jason
that.
Tatum was bringing up the ball.
Right. And they've also obviously got the flaw of, like, Jaylen Brown can't bring the ball up or he dribbles it off his foot like 8% of the time. So, yeah, I think it's interesting that they're both very different. The Bucks, I think, are clearly better. They're also different, and it does set the Heat up in like kind of this position where they're different because they lost 2 starters, but I don't know if they're gonna like their identity is gonna be different, right? Like it's still gonna be Bam and Jimmy and Kyle and Duncan Robinson running off screens and shooting threes, right? Like their personnel is different, but I don't think the style is different. And in some ways, I think that could be, at least for the regular season, a good thing for the Heat, who obviously, were in the play-in last year. And, but 2 years ago, we're the 1 seed. And I wouldn't be surprised if we're closer to, even though I think there's a bigger gap between the Heat and like the Bucks and Celtics than there was, like, I wouldn't be surprised if the Heat finish ahead of them in the regular season, because I think, obviously so much depends on how much Jimmy plays. If he plays more than the 10 games that he promised he would play today.
Plays 10 games, that might be an issue.
Yeah. But, they're going to know who they are from day one. I don't know how much that matters when we get to the playoffs, once, presumably Giannis and Lillard have figured it out, or, Kristaps Porzingis, who's only played in 41 games, is, they gear him up to be healthy for the playoffs. Like, come playoff team, I don't know if it'll matter as much, but I think in the regular season, especially early, I think the Heat have to like kind of stack some wins early because they know who they are, and they kind of screwed around for a lot of last year, and I would like to think that they're not going to do that again this year, but who knows?
The funniest outcome would be the Heat somehow getting into the finals again, right? After all,
it would be hysterical.
I know it would be great for Boston and Milwaukee fans, but that would be funny. After all this offseason, like the Heat still find a way, Jimmy Butler and Bam Adebayo still find a way to get the Heat to the finals over those teams. The Heat have taught, and like Eric Spoelstra has mentioned this multiple times in the first 3 days of media day and the first 2 days of camp, about him wanting the team to be more intentional in the regular season, about just being consistent, taking it more seriously. Like that's a big focus. And he's brought up like, last year some of it was circumstantial, the injuries and missed games, and like, that's true. I think that led still the league and missed games due to injury. But he's spoken about like them wanting to be more intentional, of using the regular season as not only to stack wins, but to improve and grow as they, go into the playoffs. So I think there will be more of an emphasis on obviously getting more wins in the regular season than last year. They don't want to be a play-in team again. But look, I think the bottom line is, yes, like it was a rough week for the Heat, for Heat fans. It was a rough offseason for the Heat. Like, again, they didn't make a significant addition. 2 of the best teams in the East did. They got better, probably. But the Heat probably still the 3rd best team in the East, right? Or like if they stay healthy.
Yeah, the Philly, who is the other team that I think, Philly, maybe Cleveland. I know they didn't do anything in the playoffs, but like those are the other teams that like
Cleveland has Cleveland has the 3rd best odds right now, which Vegas, for what it's worth, but Cleveland has the 3rd best odds to win the East, which I thought was a little bit surprising because, they're good, but the Heat were clearly a better playoff team than them, right? Like last year, and
they lost to New York, right?
Yeah, and the Heat, they took them 6 games to beat New York, but the Heat were clearly better than the Knicks in that series. Like there wasn't much of a doubt that the Heat were going to win that series.
That game was over after 2 games, pretty much.
Yeah. So a little bit surprising, but I think if the Heat stay healthy, they're still the 3rd best team in the East. And at that point, like, all it takes is an injury to Kristaps Porzingis or Chris Middleton, and then the Heat, kind of it's a toss up almost. Maybe Milwaukee's still better, but the gap isn't that wide. So it is disappointing. Like you wanted the Heat, I think the Heat wanted to add that third star. Didn't happen, but they're still a good team. Like they're still going to win a lot of games. They're still, I would think, make the playoffs. It'd be very disappointing if they didn't make the playoffs. So we'll see. I think it's important to offer perspective because I've just seen so much doom and gloom the last few days, and it's like we're celebrating the Marlins and watching them right now. Squeaking into the playoffs is a wild card, and he had made the finals like 2 of the last 4 years, and the Eastern Conference Finals 3 of the last 4 years, and it's like blow it up, like the front office stinks, like this is terrible. Like relax, like things are gonna be okay.
Yeah, they've been to more conference finals in the last 2 years. They've been to as many conference finals in the last 2 years as every other South Florida team has in the last 20 years combined. So, the Heat are still, they're still going to be good. It's a little strange that we're here talking about can the Heat compete in the Eastern Conference now when I think at the start of the offseason we were saying once the Heat get Damian Lillard, can they compete for the NBA championship? They haven't, like the expectations naturally it went down like 2 steps kind of over the last.
They probably would have been the betting favorite
months.
to win the championship. I would think if they would have gotten Dame.
Yeah, I think so.
It would have been the betting
because the West is so. Are the Bucks the favorite right now? Like
I think Boston might. I think it's Boston, Milwaukee.
Because the West there's like 5 or 6 teams. It feels like kind of have a shot. Where the East, I think a lot of people are looking at it as a 2-team race. I think the Heat are looking at it as a 3-team race. I think Philly would like to think about it as a 4-team race, but Miami fans, at least you're not the Sixers because that is a mess. Does James Harden interest you at all? That will obviously be the next. It already is happening, but the next All-Star to ask to get traded, like probably the next All-Star to get traded will be James Harden. Obviously, the Heat are in the mix anytime there is an All-Star. I have to think the Heat are like pretty like. I know we keep saying like, oh, the next guy will be there, right? But like Jimmy Butler's 34 years old. Eventually, you got to just try to get a guy. I'm not saying that James Harden is the guy, but does he interest you at all?
I can tell you this from someone I spoke to last week. This is before the Drew Holiday deal.
Okay.
So I don't know if things have changed now that Drew Holiday is not available anymore, but I got a hard no on James Harden. So probably doesn't surprise people because
he is such not a Heat guy.
Yeah, and like you get him, and you probably don't have to give up Tyler to get him at this point, right? I don't know. I don't think the Heat would give up Tyler to get James Harden.
I would not give up Tyler to get James Harden either.
But you're taking the ball out of Jimmy, Bam, and Tyler's hands because James Harden needs the ball.
And if he doesn't have the ball, he gets frustrated, as like we've seen in Philadelphia, where like has kind of a good thing going on with Joel Embiid, but doesn't like it.
Yeah, and then defensively, it's not like he's gonna help on the other end. So I just don't. Yes, he's a fit in terms of like the offense was bad last year, and he's a skilled offensive player who could score points, but he's not a fit in so many other ways. And I say that like respecting James Harden, the player, as like kind of a basketball genius, right? Like he kind of not reinvented the game, but added so much to the game, like the modern NBA. Well, look, it was like analytics, right? Like threes, shots at the rim, getting free throws. Like I respect that. Like that, there's. I know people don't like watching it, but he's had a lot of success in the league. But yes, I think at this point of his career, I just don't see it as a fit. I really don't.
Yeah, if I'm the Heat, I would do it if it took like nothing to get, which is probably what it would take at this point. Like,
I don't know. Daryl Morey seems to be like wanting something.
That's the thing. Yeah.
And I think that's why a trade hasn't happened yet because teams are like,
well, he's in the same position as we talked about with Cronin, where it's like, why trade? And the same thing happened with when they traded, when he traded, or when I don't remember if he was still in Houston when he traded James Harden to Brooklyn, I guess back to Brooklyn. And so many teams over the last 3 years, but
how many trade requests has he put in? Like 4 or 5 in the last?
I mean, do you count like multiple requests from the same location? He's been on 3 teams, requested out from like all 3 now in the last 4 years. When did he? I don't even remember when he got traded to Brooklyn. I feel like we've been talking about James Harden trade since the day we started this podcast.
I remember like 2 or 3 years ago, it was like after Tyler's rookie year, where I think fans were ready to trade Tyler Herro for James Harden at that point. Like when he was asking out of Houston, there was that whole conversation of like, why wouldn't you trade Tyler Herro for James Harden? And I think you said they should do it. Did you?
I think so. And I'm like not a James Harden guy, but he was really good back then. And
yeah, I mean, I probably would have done that back then, but now looking back at it, probably a good move they didn't do that.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's kind of a, like, again, like if anyone can fix him, the Heat can, but
yeah.
You know, fool me once, shame on me. Fool me twice, shame on you. Fool me 3 times, like you're James Harden, and it does not seem like it's gonna work out anywhere.
Yeah, and can I also say this? Like, I think it's a point to remember is everyone keeps saying like Pat Riley, he used to get all the whales. Like, how come he struck out so many times? The way you build a team now has changed. It's not with cap space anymore.
Yeah.
Because these stars aren't getting to free agency. They're signing extensions with their own teams because the CBA kind of incentivizes that. And then they're asking out for a trade, right? Like when that contract is ending, or even like in Damian Lillard's case, he had 4 years left on his deal and he asked out. So you need assets, like attractive assets to get these stars. And that's kind of the underlying issue now, like with the Heat, they keep striking out on guys. They just don't have the assets that teams want for
they haven't
Kevin Durant
stockpiled
or Damian Lillard
at any point.
Yeah, every team is like.
I mean, teams like for good reason don't want their picks.
They don't like their picks because the Heat are usually good.
Like I'd much rather get Phoenix's picks,
yeah.
right? Because like when Kevin Durant and ask for a trade in a year and a half, then they might be really bad. But the Heat, even when they're, I mean, they picked in the top 10 twice, like since Dwayne Wade, pretty much, right? Like the Michael Beasley pick and the Justice Winslow pick, I think was the one.
Yeah, because Bam
was 13, I think.
13 and Tyler was 14. Yeah, so like, you need to protect those assets and kind of cash them in at the right time, because if you trade a couple of your assets for James Harden, and then next summer when Donovan Mitchell asks for a trade, you don't have what it takes to get him.
Mm-hmm.
So you really need to be patient and careful. But that's why teams are like same thing with Utah last year and Brooklyn with Kevin Durant. Like they want Bam. Like, okay, we'll do a trade with you, but we want Bam because that's the asset that they have that people want. But
and Tyler Herro is clearly very divisive. We know a couple of teams really like him.
He's polarizing. Yeah,
but some teams just don't value him really at all. Before we wrap things up, should we just there's been media day and 1 practice, 2 practices? How many practices?
2 practices.
2 practices. Yeah. Just what were kind of the big takeaways Heat-wise? We haven't talked very much about the Heat.
Yeah.
A couple, Josh Richardson back. I think Nikola Jovic is going to be a big focal point of like what is maybe different about this Heat team this year. What have kind of been the storylines, and maybe the reasons for this Heat team to like believe that they are still in that. Other than like the stuff we know Jimmy Butler, we know Bam, but they need someone to replace Max Strus. They need someone to replace Gabe Vincent. They need Kyle Lowry to be better. Like what are the kind of the big talking points kind of out of camp from these first couple of days?
Everybody improved this offseason. I'm kidding. That's what everyone said. Like that's all. Like, you ask people, and it's like everyone's improved. It's like training camp in the NFL. Everyone's good. We're gonna win the title. We all improved. We all added to our games. But besides that, like the number one thing was yesterday, the first day of camp, we spoke to Kyle Lowry, and you flat out said like, I expect to be the starting point guard. I asked him like, are you gonna be upset if you're not the starting point guard? He said, well, I don't expect to play off the bench. I expect to be the starting point guard. So that's something to watch because yes, they need to replace Gabe Vincent. Kyle Lowry really is the only true point guard on the roster.
Yeah. But I really liked him off the bench, but like I don't see another option.
I mean, I entered camp and media day from the office thinking like, and I think to start talking to other media members, they felt similar. I thought Tyler Herro would be the quote unquote point guard with like him splitting ball handling duties with Jimmy and Bam and just having
point guard for the Heat is so different.
Point guard by committee, exactly. Like even Kyle Lowry when he's in there, like a lot of times he's just like without the ball in his hands, right? So I don't know. Like, to me, I don't think Kyle should start. A, because you need to manage his minutes, right? And it's easier to manage minutes when he's playing off the bench. And B, like you said, his best minutes came off the bench last year.
Yeah.
When he was in the lineup with Tyler, Jimmy, and Bam, he just didn't fit. He was just standing there. Like, you're not getting the best out of him. He needs the ball in his hands. He needs to be attacking. He needs to put up shots. Like, if he's just standing there, you're not maximizing his skill set. So we'll see how Eric Spoelstra handles that. We asked Eric Spoelstra about Kyle Lowry saying that, and Spo was kind of non-committal and said, I'm going to let preseason and training camp kind of dictate my decisions. I don't know what I'm going to do yet. But it's just interesting that he hasn't committed, right? Because last year, that wasn't a question. It was like Kyle Lowry is QB1. He's a starting point guard. So the dynamic there with Kyle saying he expects to be a starting point guard and Eric Spoelstra saying, well, we'll see. I think that's going to be something to watch over the next 3 weeks or so. Probably at the top of the list.
Yeah.
Besides that, Tyler Herro, I think we should mention him.
Yeah.
He handled everything very well in media day. Obviously, he knew he was going to have all those questions about all the rumors and dealing with that again and Damian Lillard stuff. And no, you could tell it bothered him. You could definitely tell. Like, he's annoyed, and I don't blame him. He said like this. He's like, I've been through it before, but this one felt more real. Like, which obviously
again,
I think
we all thought
felt
it was going to happen.
Yeah. I think it seems like he thought it was going to happen. And he's just like, look, I think I've earned through my play and my time here, like the respect to have clarity. And that's all I ask for, like clarity. And I hope that I can get that moving forward. But he joked again, like just saved on Twitter. We're like, well, you're here. And he's like, well, until next summer. And honestly, if Donovan Mitchell requests a trade next summer,
yeah, that's the thing.
It's going to be the conversation again.
Tyler Herro will be in trade rumors again in the next 6 months. It's going to happen. He knows it.
I feel bad for the guy.
Yeah.
He's a good player, but he's just always in trade rumors just because he is the most attractive young asset that the Heat at this point is willing to trade. They're not willing to trade Bam, right? So the next guy on that list is Tyler Herro. Unless Nikola Jovic like has a breakout year this year, and then all of a sudden he becomes that guy, but we'll see.
Yeah. In some ways, the Jovic piece of this is when you talk about like the fact that the Heat don't seem to have the assets teams want. Jovic is in a lot of ways the most important guy, I think, for the first 2-3 months of the season, because if he goes up a level, and I still think Tyler Herro is going to be the centerpiece of whatever superstar trade they do, if they do one. But the problem right now is they don't have anything else, right? It's Tyler Herro and some picks like a million years from now.
I mean, they have their picks are starting to free up, but again, it's the teams don't want
and that's it. The teams don't want the Heat pick.
Yeah.
So if you can also say, Jovic, a guy that we drafted, we've developed him for a couple of years. We took him at what pick was that, like 19, 18, something like that?
Like 27, I think. It was like back end 27, 28.
That one, 20.
Yeah.
I think I'm thinking of I guess Hawkes was early because they didn't really pick.
Hawkes was 18, I think.
Yeah. But if you can say Jovic, this is the guy we took him 27th, but you do a redraft, you'd probably take him like 10th. Then I think it changes a lot for the Heat. So I'm excited to see him. Obviously, he had some cool moments throughout the summer. He's big because the Heat need more players. Like, they just need replacement guys for some of the guys they lost.
And more attractive trade chips. Yeah.
And more attractive trade chips.
That's the reality.
He checks both boxes.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
Hawkes, what's up with Hawkes? I feel like he's kind of like no one's talking about him, even though he's the rookie, and usually people are excited about rookies.
Yeah, I think Caleb and Jimmy both were asked about him today at practice, and both had a similar comment of like, he seems like a veteran already. Like, he plays like a veteran.
23 years old.
That's the thing, though. He's an older rookie, right?
Yeah.
He's like 23, and he played 4 years in college at UCLA. Very polished. So I think that's, we'll see if he plays right away. I kind of think he might start the season out of the rotation. But he has an advantage because he does have experience, and he is mature, and he is older. So I think for the first few days, it's kind of stood out to teammates that he doesn't really play like a rookie. He makes like the right plays, which is encouraging.
All right, I think we can wrap things up there. You can follow Anthony on Twitter at Anthony_Chang. He is obviously out at Heat training camp every day, and will be busy for the next how many months?
8 months.
8 months,
maybe?
7 months, something like that. So check him out there. Check out MiamiHerald.com. You can follow me on Twitter at DBWilson2. So I'm not as active there these days, but I will be more once basketball season starts. and college. I mean, I tweet on Saturdays. I like college.
Let's say
football.
Saturdays you're busy.
Yeah. I'll be at Hard Rock on Saturday for Miami Georgia Tech. So I'm still around.
You know the number one team in the BCS is? I know the BCS doesn't matter anymore, but do you know who the number one team in the BCS is right now?
Is it your Miami Hurricanes?
It's the Miami Hurricanes. They would be number one in the BCS standings at this point.
There we go.
You're covering the number one team in the country right now.
Yeah, there we
How
go.
does it feel?
Let's raise the banner. Let's get the trophy, the crystal trophy back. All right. Thanks as always for listening. We'll talk to you guys next week.